Welcome to the Celebration of Life for our dear friend Paul Giltinan. My name is Jeff Adwell and I've been a friend of Paul's for over 30 years. We were very close. So close in fact that he referred to me as his son, a title I'll cherish for the rest of my days. Paul passed away on February 16th of 2022 from COVID pneumonia. His wishes were to have a small graveside service in his hometown of Du Bois, Pennsylvania. And those wishes were carried out on February 24th, where he was laid to rest next to his mother, in attendance with family and friends. After spending the afternoon with Marty on February 16th, calling all of Paul's friends and people that needed to know about his passing, it became pretty clear that we need to do something else for the people that could not make it to Du Bois. So his decision was made to have a celebration of life event here at Motor City Solutions, a place that he helped build. It proved to be a good idea. People from all over the country made it here. People from Pennsylvania, South Carolina, North Carolina, far away as Alaska. And there were people from around the world that wanted to attend here, people from Germany and Australia. So we decided to film this event so that everybody could enjoy it. Paul would be horrified if he knew about this event, or maybe he does know. I apologize for this, Paul, but this is what happens when you put a footprint the size of yours on the world. People want to get together and talk about you. Paul had a profound effect on so many people. He especially loved helping people that he felt had a lot of potential but just needed that little extra push. I, for one, am a beneficiary of that wonderful trait. He helped so many people that the true reach will never be known. When it came to giving, he was generous, he was humble, and he stayed in the background. A testament to Paul's character happened the day that he was laid to rest in Pennsylvania. His favorite place to eat while he was in Du Bois was Perkins Restaurant. He ate there almost every day and they knew him well. After the grade-sized service, Marty invited everybody to come there and attend for luncheon. There were about 20 people that made it. When Marty went to pay the bill, she had found out that 2 of the wait staff had picked up the tab. 2 of the staff that weren't there that day. They just knew about the event was coming and they wanted to get it. They were generous, they were humble, and they stayed in the background, just the way Paul would have done it. And I can't think of a better example of the effect he had on people than that one. If you knew Paul, you knew he loved everything engineering. The tagline that he was an engineer's engineer is perfect for him. And there were 3 areas in his life that really encompassed this: his career at Ford Motor Company, his career in NASCAR, and his love for sound systems, speakers, and electronics that delivered the sound. We have 3 guests here that worked with Paul in these areas. We have Dennis Marcus, who worked with Paul at Ford Motor Company. We have Gary Nelson, that worked with Paul in NASCAR. And we have his dear friend Matt Duda, who spent numerous hours working in the lab with Paul, testing, measuring sound equipment. And Marty asked them if they'd be willing to come up and speak and give some of their testimonies and stories about their time with Paul, and they agreed to do so. You will also see that several family, friends, neighbors, co-workers came up to have a few words to share about Paul. So with that being said, hope you enjoy Paul's celebration of life. Thank you.
Paul was my boss for many years. He was my mentor, and not just to get ahead in the world, but also to be a better engineer. As a friend, we've spent countless hours together on the phone or together at his house or mine or at Miller's Bar, talking about everything politics and how to solve personal and world problems. If people could listen in to what we talked about at Miller's, I'm sure this world would be a better place. So after graduating from Penn State in 1965, by the way, Paul had a degree in mechanical and electrical engineering. Paul worked for a company called HRB Singer in Pennsylvania as a mechanical engineer before he came to Ford, and then a short time as a powertrain engineer at a place called Consolidated Diesel Electric, and that was in Connecticut. So in 1967, Paul joined Ford. He joined Ford in heavy truck. He was a drivetrain engineer in the beginning. And then he moved to steering and suspension on heavy truck. And that's where he continued to progress. In 1972, Paul became a senior engineer in heavy truck body. So he was recognized both inside and outside the company as a world expert in suspension design and vehicle dynamics. I'm going to quote Buddy Chance. I found something that Buddy Chance wrote. So at this time of his career, his expertise was used in chassis engineering for suspension and steering and brake design, and used as a sounding board by light truck, SVE, ELD, AVET, EAO, testing operations, and overseas engineering. So for the people that don't know Ford, that's a whole bunch of acronyms for all these different organizations in Ford. I don't know that there was any that didn't call on Paul.
I met Paul in 1981. It was about the middle of the year. NASCAR races all over the country every year. And we were up there at Michigan racing with a driver named Ricky Rudd. And we had been nowhere all year. We were back of the pack, looked like we didn't know what we were doing. And Paul comes by and he starts talking to me, and it made sense to me. He would say, what's your car doing? I said, well, it's slow. And our goal is not to be slow. And so he said, well, try this. And we did something, and we were a little better. I said, Paul, that was better. He said, well, try this. And he gave me he's just a guy that I just walked up and was talking. And we went on, I think we finished in the top 3 or 4, one of our better finishes of the season. Michigan was about midway through the season in 1981. And, I stayed in touch with Paul on the phone. Those days we didn't have cell phones, and we had to use pay phones and home phones with the wire on the wall, but no text messages, no emails. So I thought, man, this guy might know something. It turned our program around a little bit in a few comments. We went on to, I stayed in touch with him, but we were pretty much, he's a Ford engineer working every day, and I'm a crew chief on a Chevrolet. So there's a little, I'll get to this in a minute, but I think I'm personally responsible for Paul to get about 3 promotions at Ford. I'll get to that at the end here, but Paul kind of guided us a little, just a little bit. He was very careful to not oversell his ideas, but he was pretty confident. He had worked with Bill Elliott in the years leading up to that, and Bill Elliott went from kind of nobody to a top driver. And he had mentioned that a few times, so he got a little credibility, but he mainly got credibility with me because his ideas were simple. The way of racing in those days was go see Jake Elder because he knows everything. And Jake Elder was a guy that couldn't read or write, but he knew race car setups had a reputation for that. the typical Jake Elder race car setup put all the weight on the right front, the right rear, and the left rear tire, and the left front tire never hardly wore at all. And Paul's logic was, if you got 4 tires, you ought to use them. And by the way, if you got 4 tires, they all ought to agree on where the car wants to go. And we were making all of those mistakes as we worked through our racing, trying to win races. I realized that, yeah, having 4 tires working equally should give you more potential than having 3 tires working hard and one getting a free ride. So he would instill those kind of thoughts in my head. We went through 81, had the second half of our year was pretty good, but 82, Ricky Rudd left our team, Bobby Allison joined the team. And I said, Bobby, I got this engineer that I'm trying to get more involved in. He really knows what he's doing. And Bobby's like, engineers? We don't need no engineers. And I'm like, Bobby, really? So it was just a few weeks before the Daytona 500, and we signed Bobby and off to the racetrack. So I had our July setup from Daytona, and I put it in Paul's setup from July to 81. So going into Daytona 82, Bobby didn't have time to do anything. He just showed up and drove the car. And we won the pole, or we qualified third, won the qualifying race, and won the Daytona 500. I mean, just going away. I think the race is about 200 laps, and I think we led about 175 or something, just gone. And Bobby Allison, yeah, that was great. I said, yeah, well, that's Paul's setup. He says, yeah, but for the next race, I'll send you the setup. So we went so Bobby sends the setup, and I look at it, and it's kind of a Jake Elder setup, which was popular in those days. And we go all the way to May. In the NASCAR world, that's about a third of the season, maybe 10, 12 races. Nothing in the back, we were a back marker. We got to the Dover race in May, and I said, Bobby, this is not working. When we get to the racetrack next week, I want you to not even ask a question about the car setup. You just show up and drive like you did back in Daytona. Bobby was not happy, but I told him that's the way it's going to be. And I called Paul and I said, Paul, we're going to Dover. I really need a little help. I'm struggling here. And he said, do this, this, and this. And this was just over the phone. It wasn't him there. And we got to Dover. Bobby Allison won the race by 4 laps in the NASCAR Cup Series event. And to me, that was the point in my mind where Bobby would get transformed to listen to engineering and listen to Paul. And Bobby took it the other way. It was think how much better we'd have been if we'd done my setup. But so we went on. I couldn't ever get Paul integrated into that team, 82, 83. And we won the championship, and we kind of worked things pretty well, but 84 came along, and it was just, Bobby and I we just couldn't agree that the car needs this type of logic. And so we're struggling and struggling. Finally, I called Paul up in 84, and I said, Paul, how about I put together a car and you and I just go to Daytona and see what we can do in the July race. So I told Bobby Allison, I said, Bobby, this guy here is going to be your crew chief. I'm going to go do an R&D project. We go. So Paul started flying down on his days off and his holidays and his vacation days. This is 84 in the spring. And we have one race car and we got a little building, and I hired this kid. He walked in wearing sandals and shorts. He was out of New Zealand. I hired him, so it was Paul, myself, and Tony, and we put this car together. We went to, Paul came he took all of his vacation time, I think, and all of his days off. We put this car together, working 20 hours a day for a couple weeks, maybe a month. Showed up at Daytona, there was 3 of us. And all I wanted to do was show people that we could make a car competitive. And really it was Paul's logic put into a race car. We got to Daytona with this, we hired a driver, his name was Greg Sachs. He had never won a race in his life, barely had any experience. And we showed up with, I got the guy some shoes with some, he didn't have to wear the sandals and didn't have to wear the shorts, but we didn't have much money. We unloaded the car and we qualified top 5, I think. And 3 of us, Paul, myself, and Tony, did the whole, practice, unload, practice, qualify, get time for the race, and all of a sudden, Greg Sachs is leading the Daytona 400-mile race in July, and Greg Sachs goes on to win the thing by a good margin. Nobody out, none of the other drivers that had been winning all the way up to there, including Bobby Allison, who finished in the back, could keep up with this car that we put together. To this day, they still talk about the biggest upset in NASCAR history was Greg Sachs winning the Daytona Firecracker 400, 1984, and that was all Paul Giltinan. I was just a guy that found a car in a building and said, "Paul, do your magic," and Paul did his magic all right. But he's a Ford engineer, and we're a GM team, a Chevrolet team. So Paul always had trouble when he would get back to the office of why Ford's finished second to Paul's Chevrolet. And so I know that was causing him some issues. And part of it was he liked to stay in the background. He didn't like his name mentioned, but when there's only 3 of us and 1 kid from New Zealand that everybody knew he wasn't doing anything, and me that was just kind of pulling it together, and Paul standing there in the winner's circle, they pretty much knew who did it. So we go on to Kyle Petty driving. Well, I'll skip. We had Jeff Bodine. I called Paul up and said, "Paul, I got another driver, Jeff Bodine. Need a little help." He's a lot like Bobby Allison, doesn't think that the engineering is the way to go in NASCAR. We won the Daytona 500 with Jeff Bodine.
You're riding down for the finish. Checkered flag is out, and you are with Jeff Bodine as he wins the 1986 Daytona 500. Bodine has done it. CBS camera on board. The Rick Hendrick Racing Stable out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Jeff Bodine from Chemung, New York, has won the Daytona 500.
If I counted the people that Paul worked with in NASCAR and the number of Daytona 500s that his fingerprints are on, I would say it's every Daytona 500 since 1982. Paul's fingerprints are on those wins, and still today, because now the racing people have embraced the engineering, but he's the pioneer that made that happen. We got with Kyle Petty. Kyle Petty had only marginally been competitive in his whole career. All of a sudden, the best 2 years of Kyle Petty's career were working with Paul. We dominated races unbelievably with Paul's work. So I mentioned Jake Elder setups. That kind of thinking was, you start the first practice, you adjust the wedge or the spring rates, and by the time race day comes around, you don't touch that car because you've got it perfect. Paul came in race day morning, the car's in the garage, and all the other race cars are all in the garage. we had won the pole and we were the fastest car in all the practice, and we, in my mind, the same as everybody else, we're race ready. Paul comes in and says, "Gary, I've been thinking about it." I said, "All right, what's coming?" He said, "I want to change all 4 springs in this suspension, all 4 of them." And I said, "Paul, that's unheard of in NASCAR racing." I said, "But I trust you." So we changed all 4 springs, and everybody, all the railbirds in the garage and all the smart people, they were like, "Oh, these guys are out to lunch." Nobody changes 4 springs just before the start of a 500-mile race. We did it, and we dominated that race. We won that race by a long distance. So Paul was, I trusted him with anything that if he came to me and said, "I think we need to do this," I said, "No problem. How am I going to get this done?" Because I just trusted him so much. So as I mentioned, we were always GM, and Paul would always go back to his office, and his bosses would always ask what he did on the weekend, and he would downplay it, I'm sure, but they knew he was working on he was working for Ford as a job, but helping a GM Chevrolet team winning NASCAR races. And in 1991, Bill France, who owned NASCAR at the time, hired me to become a NASCAR official, which took me out of the crew chief role. And I called Paul up and I said, "Paul, I'm gonna be a NASCAR official. I won't be involved in setting up race cars and trying to win races anymore." He said, "Oh, good for you. That's probably a better career path." So I always trusted his guidance in those, life decisions. And we go on to race. I'm a NASCAR official now, and Paul, he was looking for a team, or teams were looking for him at that point. He ended up with a Ford team, working with a Ford team. And he told me after a few years had passed, he said, "When I stopped working on Chevrolet race cars, I got 3 promotions at Ford." So, but I don't think he would trade any of those trophies. So now fast forward up into, I did my 90s and early 2000s with NASCAR, and I would still check with Paul on decisions I'd have to make, bounce things off of him, and he would say, "Well, do you ever think about doing it this way or that way?" So I always stayed in touch with him for number one, because he's a friend of mine, but number 2, because I trusted his logic, his ability to kind of steer things with a small adjustment rather than just, my mentality was, things aren't working right, let's go this direction. Things aren't working right, let's go that. Paul would just barely make minor adjustments. And 2007 comes around, 2008, I'm with a road race team, racing in IMSA, endurance racing. We're in the back, terrible team, engineering, in those days, the engineer kind of did the setup, the strategist did the strategy, and the drivers drove the car. Well, this guy calls me up, a friend of mine. He says, "Hey, I got this IMSA team, and we've been racing the last 5 years, and we haven't won a race. Can you go see what's wrong?" He was just spending lots of money and not getting any performance. I go to the team, and I called the guy up, and I said, "We got a lot of work to do." And so I called Paul. And I said, "Paul, what do you know about road racing?" I already knew that his suspension tuning would be fine. It's the same logic. And he starts talking to me. So about 2008, he starts working with us. And 2009, I get him on board full time, or not full time, but to all the races. We go to Daytona, and same kind of mentality as we had experienced back in the 80s. "Oh, that stuff won't work. You can't do it that way." everybody does it this other way. I said, yeah, but we haven't won a race in 5 years. We ought to try something. So Paul comes in, first race, Daytona 24 Hours of 2010, I'm sorry. And we win the Daytona 24 Hours, Rolex 24, with Paul engineering the car. And he's proven himself so many times to me that I had no doubts. It wasn't going to be the engineering that cost us to run badly. It was going to be other mechanical things or mistakes made by the team. Paul went on through that year, and we were fighting the same thing. I would have to say, the stuff works. It's good. And the drivers and the team, yeah, but we always used to do it this way. And so I ended up not being able to win that fight. And Paul got pretty frustrated. And he said, Gary, it's the same thing we had in the 80s, and we're doing it again. I said, yeah, but look at these trophies we're getting. We can keep it going. All we got to do is fight and argue with these guys. And he stuck it out with me. We won 2 races that year, the first race and the last race, and end up we couldn't just continue with that much of an uphill struggle. So Paul and I then just stayed in touch. We'd race Detroit here, and I'd invite him out to the track. He came once, I think. I invited him last year, and I think he almost came, Marty, but I think it was a really hot day or something, or maybe it was raining, I'm not sure. But I hadn't seen Paul other than I called him, or he would call me off and on after something would happen. And Paul always stayed in touch with the NASCAR program, and he knew I was part of the NASCAR program also. I still am. He would always ask, what are they doing? I said, Paul, they're spitting in the ocean. And those kind of conversations I remember so well with him. So I learned more from Paul as a guy trying to make some kind of success in racing. My thing was, let's go get the trophies, and if we win a trophy, I'd let somebody else take. I didn't even take them home. I just wanted to know that for everybody in this room and anybody I speak to in the future, all of those trophies have Paul's fingerprints on them. So I think that's it for me. I appreciate everybody very much.
I met Paul when I first started working for JBL, the speaker company. He cold called our office and said, hey, want one of your guys to give me a call. And so my boss gave me this note and said, okay, I'll give him a call. And I thought, well, we're going to discuss something for an upcoming Mustang program or something. And he was like, and instead it was like, what do you know about this speaker? And what do you know about this one? And this one. And he was so interested and already so involved in the professional JBL line that it was throwing me in the deep end of learning that side of my business, because I was in the automotive engineering where we used, little 6x9s and little speakers like that. So it was a whole new world for me to jump into, and I loved it, the fact that he was just so engaged and interested in engineering on the products, and he had already spent, I'll just say countless hours with the JBL engineers in Northridge, California, tweaking in designs. These sound systems that he made were for an organ he told me about that was set up in his basement that Marty played. And I'm like, wait a minute, I play organ too. And so that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And then we would talk every few days, it seems. And then, and I was traveling a lot for work, and I had to go out to Colorado for a press event for a launch of a vehicle. And Paul was like, well, Marty and I are going to be out there. So I went out there, and that was when I first met Marty, is in Colorado. And we seemed to hit it off. My wife, who couldn't be here today, she just had an operation and she has to stay. She just had a serious operation a couple days ago, so she's healing well and everything, but there's no way she's getting up and coming out, so she won't be able to be here today. But one thing she did tell me was how excited I was when I called her on the phone, because I'd call her every evening after my work day, and she goes, you were so excited about meeting Paul and Marty especially. It's like because of all the common interests we had, and so that was right at the beginning of 1995, and our friendship has gone from there until now. It's been a fantastic thing. We started really getting interested in hi-fi together. Well, he already was because of the organ stuff, and then he was always trying to make the JBL designs that you would just buy speakers. He had lots of commercially made JBL speakers, and he liked that one or this one, but there's this I didn't like about it, and that I didn't like about the other one, and so he kept tweaking the design, and finally this is the design he came up with. And with just a little bit of coaching from the JBL professional team, and I was able to help him with some of the electronic side of it, because I was active as an electrical engineer at the time, and we would talk. By that time, we were talking probably an hour every day, and there'd be times, and multiple times a day, it's like, what about trying this, or this, and I'd set him up with a software program that he could use to tweak the designs and designing of the bass cabinets, and choosing all the drivers that work well with the crossovers, and we spent a lot of time working with that, and then he ended up building a set like this, and it's like very good, and then it's like, but what about this? We kept digging at it, and so then he was really good at pushing me, I think. He could push me to go so much further than I would even think to do myself. But I'd research it and find out, and I, as a result, became really good at power supply design. And we went way out beyond what anyone would normally do on these designs, but I think the results show pretty amazing stuff. Paul was just such a dear friend to me. It's like every topic that I would just need to, that we would discuss with each other. In fact, even near the end, we were having old man talks. It seems like, things that retirees or people getting up there in age can talk about. It's like, this ache and pain or this whatever, and it's like, it was just great the time I got to have with him, and that's about all I can say. He was wonderful. Thank you.
I knew he was brilliant. I didn't know how brilliant he was. And when one of our neighbors had said he was just dynamic when it came to everything engineering, and I told our kids, they said, wow, we didn't know Mr. Giltinan was that smart. And when I first met him, he came over after we bought the house. And through the years, he saw our kids grow from babies to young adults. He had a personal affinity with our youngest, who was also a wrestler, and would teach him wrestling moves. And I saw Mr. Giltinan as he was our taxi driver to and from the airport. He was watched out for our kids, as Miss Marty does all the time. He was a babysitter, believe it or not. When I was in a pinch, I called him and asked him if he would babysit. When I came home, I found our youngest curled up on his lap, sleeping. And Stevie thought he was Santa Claus. He called our daughter Marta baby, and she stomped her foot and she said, "I'm not a baby." But he continued to call her that even when she became a young adult. When our son came home from high school with a Bernie Sanders bumper sticker on his car, Mr. Giltinan called and said, "I want you to know there's something on your son's car." And I asked, "What is it?" And he said, "A Bernie Sanders bumper sticker." I said, "Are you kidding me?" So I called my son and I said, "What the hell is this?" And he said, "It was a joke. I wanted to see you go nuts." I said, "You have to deal with Mr. Giltinan." He's the one that, so anyways, that was kind of funny. So I took him, he was my buddy to talk to about politics. He had a really good sense of humor. When he would go out of town, I would tell him, "Mr. Giltinan, Marty hosted a bunch of local Democrats for a fundraiser." And so I could joke with him about that, talk to him about, pardon? It wasn't true. It wasn't true. Joked with him a ton about what was going on in the world. Talked seriously about it as well. So it was fun hanging out with him. Always had our back. Talked to him about Michigan football, Penn State football, and he was just a good neighbor, always looked out for the neighborhood, and went to our son's wrestling meets. Yeah, he was like almost a second grandpa to them. So he's gonna be missed.
I was getting a massage and I'm laying on the table and I hear the knock on the door and I asked the massage therapist, I said, "Well, see who it is." It's Paul, I can hear his voice. I said, "Well, let him in." So he comes in and, I'm laying on the table in my birthday suit and he walks in and he sits down at the piano. He doesn't say anything, he just walks in and he sits at the piano and he starts playing a classical piece. In the meantime, he had told me he doesn't know how to play. And then he got up and just walked out and shut the door and didn't say goodbye. Now, in the meantime, I'm wondering if Marty knows that he goes and visits people in these weird outfits. He's a brilliant engineer and no doubt, but he needs help in wardrobe department sometimes.
I'm just glad somebody said something about his shorts, because that's the first time I met him, and he really, I looked at him, I said, this man is very interesting. But all of you knew him so much as an engineer, and I didn't. The first time we went over to the house, of course, we had a nice dinner, and he sat us down in front of the TV and started playing Diana Krall and started showing me his speakers. And then I think we listened to Pavarotti live with an orchestra, and he's talking about all these different frequencies. And, you know, I've grown up a musician, and I used to build speakers when I was 12, but nothing like what he can do. And so when he started talking to me about all that stuff, I'm like, boy, this guy's nuts. He knows so much, and I had no idea all the things he knew about engineering, but I had a sense that he really knew about his audio engineering, and his ears were so tuned. And the piano they bought, and they shopped for years for this perfect piano that Paul, he had to have it perfect for Marty, and building the organ in the basement and the speakers, and he was just so fascinating. But one story I just want to share. We were doing a studio session in one of the finest studios in Michigan that I've ever been into, and they have the best gear, and they designed it and engineered it, and they put all the amps in this back room so there's no noise, and the furnace is underground. And Paul comes in, he starts looking around. You don't have a JBL system in here. I went, oh boy. And so he starts looking at the microphones and talking to the engineer about the microphones. Why'd you get this one? And you know, this frequency response isn't the same as this other one, and you should have done this. And I'm going, we're kind of on the clock here in this session. But he had such a good time. He just walked in his shorts, and we're getting ready to make some music, but he wanted to figure out the system in the studio, and the speakers and the mics, and why they did what they did and how they did it. But he was so interested in my music, in Marty's music, in how we put it together and how it was going to come out. And it was just such a great experience. I'm so blessed to have met both of you.
He was a neighbor that I'll miss, that I loved, and so did many people. He was special. And there won't be a day that goes by that I won't think of him and wish he was still here. And thank you.
He was by far the best boss that I've had. I don't know why he picked me, but I was lucky enough to be that person. I can only tell you that he helped me out tremendously personally, for my career, just as a human being. I got to meet Marty. After I moved on, after working for Paul, I obviously kept in touch with him, and even up until recently, he would always call me, a couple times a month. And, with Paul, he always would try to trick you into asking certain questions, and you had to answer a certain way. I'll never forget that. He always would call me and ask me things, and it was always a lot of fun. I miss him stopping by. He would stop by like when you would drop Marty off, I think up when you were playing for the one church. He would just come by and stop at my house. It wouldn't matter what we were doing. He would just come in and sit down, and it was fine. We had a great time together. So, the good thing with Paul is he always had good people around him. I met a lot of you that are here through Paul. And I know some of you I don't know, but I did always hear about you guys through one way, form or another, because he kind of kept his little world together, and he had his group of people. And I'm very appreciative to be part of his life. He'll be missed. He was a great boss. He was a great person, and just a great human being. So I'll miss him.
The one thing that I would always tell Paul is he would pull out his wallet in the morning, and he'd have it seemed like $2,000 in cash in his wallet. I don't know if you knew this about Paul, but his wallet was like this big when I hang. And I always just said, Paul, you shouldn't walk around with that kind of money in your wallet. He's like, don't worry about it. I'm fine. And that's the type of guy he was, though. He was so trustworthy. And I don't know anybody that would do that, right? That would trust. And he he was. He was very trustworthy. And when he trusted you, when you were in his world, you knew you were part of, you were special. And he made me what I am today, you know, as far as a mechanic, you know, attention to detail, something you can't teach. You either have it or you don't. And that's how Paul, I think that's one of Paul's mottos, you know, you have to have attention to detail. And that's what it's about. And everything you do, whether it was HVAC, you know, and Jeff was a big part of the HVAC thing at the very beginning. I know we were sending a lot of people over to get HVAC fixed. So it's, you know, that's what he did. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. He was a great man, made me what I am today. And, you know, the engineering community is definitely going to miss a big guy there. Those are shoes you can't fill.
First time I met Paul, wanted me to do some work in the house. And so he calls me up and he goes, I can't be there. I had to come home. I think he was getting his new car or something. And he said he had this, a guy that worked for his mother, Fran. And he goes, just do whatever Fran wants, you know, just follow his lead or whatever. So we're up on the 3rd floor. And I worked 3 days and I called him on the phone. I said, Paul, this isn't gonna work. I said, you don't even have to pay me. I says, I'm done. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm done working. And he goes, let me guess, is it Fran? And I said, yeah, it's Fran. I says, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And he says, don't go anywhere, don't go anywhere. He says, start on something else up there. And I says, well, what do you want me to do? And start in the bathroom. And I said, okay. I said, we gonna remodel it? What are we doing? He goes, yeah. So I go up there and I do like you do in construction. I rip everything out. Everything's out. And so he gets back, I think it was the following week or something. And I didn't realize it at the time, but he walks in and he doesn't say nothing to me. And he goes, at first, and he goes, why did you tear the walls out? And I says, well, that's what you do. You got to tear it out, and then you can wire it, you can plumb it, you can insulate it nice. And he goes, well, Brad, this is plastering. This is steel plaster. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, how are we going to put that back? And I said, well, I can do that. I says, I can do all that. And I got a million questions over that because he loved his plaster. And I didn't know, you know, that it was such a big deal to him at the time. And so we went through and we insulated everything like crazy, like we did. And actually before this, or no, after this, we were, anyways, I found out that I could put it back, and I put it back, you know, the way you're supposed to. And I mean, he was checking my angles were sharp and everything. I mean, that's just what he was. And I didn't realize at the time that I was being critiqued, you know. And so then we was insulating the upstairs and the attics and that. And the only way you could get to it is you had to open up the roof. And we had scaffolds. I'd set scaffold up, and Paul would get up there. Oh man, what it was, about 63 probably. He would climb up there in the roof with me, and I'd crawl back in, and he'd shove the insulation back into me. And the one night we worked till like 9:30 at night, and it was dark. We had flashlights, and I couldn't believe he climbed up there. He wasn't afraid of heights at the time. And so anyways, we start on the rest of the house, and he told me later on, he goes, when I first saw that you tore them walls out, he said, I was pissed. He said, but then that became once he knew I could put it back and you couldn't tell, you know, it was all original, that's the way it was from then on. Every room we did, we gutted. Last year? I started working for this other guy, and I'm doing all kinds of building for him. He's got a bunch of land, and we're putting ATV trails in, and I'm building stuff for him. And Paul's looking at the pictures and that. Well, the guy decided to put solar lights in everything. I had to put the solar panels up, and I was having trouble. I was having trouble figuring out. I said, and so I'm doing I'm fixing the house, tweaking the house again for him up in Du Bois. And I says, Paul, I had the schematic, and I says, look at this, what am I doing wrong? And he says, well, I have to come out and look at it. And I says, Paul, you can't drive in here. You got to take a ATV in. And we all know Paul. And I said, you're going to have to ride my ATV, you know. And he says, I'll do it. So we watching him get in that thing. And once I got him in, then he wanted to see everything. But he came down there, and it took us about an hour and figured out what I had the one setting wrong on it. And he looked at it and figured it out for me, and then we spent the rest of the day going and looking at all the projects and everything. And he says, I knew he couldn't understand that's what some people do for fun, because that wasn't his cup of tea. But he was like a father. That could have been some.
It was just like everybody says, he always had time, always was interested, and, you know, just kept, I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he kept in touch with everybody. I don't know how he remembered what everybody was doing, but he always did. And he was a very, very important part of our family, and Marty just kind of integrated with our family as well and welcomed us in, you know, and we've been very fortunate the years we had, the time we had, and like everybody else, we will really miss them. But we know the house in Du Bois. We've been there since we went there when we were little, when his mom was still living, and so it like we're his representation from home and family, and he was just as wonderful to us as, you know, it sounds like he was to all of you. So he certainly had a very extended family, and we're glad that you all got to see part of what we lived with too. So, and thank you for all these wonderful things you had to say about him. It was just, you know, it's interesting to hear, you know, people as family, but you don't necessarily know them as a professional. You know, I don't know the first thing about a car, other than, you know, Paul always gave me advice on it, but it was a car. So, but you know, it's to see his work perspective, then his racing perspective, and then the speakers, we all knew about the speakers, and it's just nice to hear everybody's input on all these other aspects of Paul's life that were kind of on the fringes that we didn't know, and we just wanted you to know that he was equally as great in the family as he was in the profession.
I learned something here. You know, Mrs. Vaccarelli said he knew every kid in the neighborhood, and I thought it was just me. And then it turns out he's mentored half the people in this room. And again, I thought, you know, I was special. But now hearing everyone, I think that Paul was special, and we were lucky to know him. When I got older, I called him for advice all the time, and he was always so kind to me and my family. And I guarantee I've got more time than anyone in this room in the driver's seat of that car, given these parameters: garage door closed, engine off. So my sister and I are here, and we love Paul and Marty, and yeah, I concur. The theme holds true. Paul's great, and he'll be missed.
One of these mornings, one of these mornings, it won't be very long. They will look for me